Here we go. Hope you can hear that music. Play it every week. Carlton Pearson, welcome to Streaming Consciousness. That's our song, Tapping, by Charles Holt, who I just love and love the song and love the lyrics and wish I could play the whole thing for you or you could get a hold of the CD. It's really fantastic, but we stretch you. That's why we're here, to put a demand on you, actually, to extend and expand your own consciousness, your own way of thinking and evaluating and perceiving and assessing and accessing yourself and soul. Tonight we're going to talk about racism, something that's been in the news a lot lately. And I always try to take a little bit of a different approach to whatever the subject is. I actually think differently. Whatever the crowd is thinking, I tend to think a little bit different or get suspicious of why everybody's thinking pretty much the same way. Racism is something that I've heard, and if you're African American or any ethnicity in America particularly, you're going to hear a lot about racism and races and ethnicities and prejudices and discriminations. There's a very strong victim consciousness in all cultures, particularly when you feel like you are a minority within a culture, whether you're Jewish or Hispanic or Islamic or Arab, African American. Rarely do white people or Anglos feel they are the minority, though in this country, that's rapidly becoming the reality. The predominantly white race is being outnumbered in this country by blacks and African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and other Americans. And of course, they are European Americans. The Native Americans are the only real or original Americans. We've all come here and we like to call ourselves a melting pot, but we're really a stew in this country. Every piece in the stew maintains its own nature. The tomato is the tomato, the corn is the corn, the onion is the onion, the okra is the okra. But when you stew together in a pot for long enough, you taste better. You take on a little bit of the traits and tastes and characteristics of the other ingredients within the stew. And that's something wonderful. That's what I call radical inclusion. And it's beautiful. So I want to talk, though, tonight, and I posted this today. I'm going to ask those questions to you. You may not have read the post, depending on when you particularly when you hear this or see this particular lecture. Which one of these do you think about first when you think of racism? Just think of the word. What does it trigger? What comes alive in you? What comes up when you hear the word racism? Slavery, discrimination, beating, some personal experience you had. When I read these two descriptions or definitions, tell me which one comes to your mind first when you hear the word racism. Number one, the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or races. Let me read it again. When you hear the word racism, is this one of the thoughts that comes to your mind, or is it the first description or definition of racism that comes to your mind? The belief that all members of each race, and there are many of them, possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race or ethnicity is what I really mean, especially so as to distinguish that particular ethnicity as inferior or superior to another race or other races. That's a little wordy, but think about that. And does this come to your mind? Is this closer to what you really think or experience, or what comes up for you when you hear the word racism? Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior? Has that been your experience of racism? Or is it just identifying one against the other as, or opposed to the other, or unlike the other, and thus inferior or superior? Is one of those descriptions more poisonous than the other? So tonight we're going to talk about, in this very unique discussion, ways to respond to rather than react to varying experiences of racism? Or is classism the real or equally as critical threat these days? Racism, classism, income levels, social strata or strata, where you live geographically in a city, what neighborhood, is it predominantly black, predominantly white, or is it multicultural? And is the tax bracket higher? What kind of taxes do you pay? How are the streets? What are the condition of the businesses and commercial properties around you? There's all kinds of ways to look at prejudice, prejudging, judging somebody before knowing them or meeting them or really experiencing them, judging them visually based on wardrobe, clothes, racial profiling, cultural profiling, gender biases, homophobia. There's all kinds of prejudgments out there. If you've never met a gay person or had a conversation with a gay person or got to know them closely, or a gay couple and observe them or befriend them or go eat with them or live near them, then you can't really judge them accurately unless you've experienced them. You can't go by what you see on television or just read or see on the internet. It's better to have an encounter with an integrated couple or a same-gender loving couple or a couple of another ethnicity or of another religion. Do you work with people who don't live like you or where you live? We all live similarly, but not identically the same. And our diet is different, our wardrobe selections or choices, the kind of cars we drive, the places where we shop. All of these things have to do with the diversity of the culture, and they're all beautiful. But I want to talk about it because it's been in the news lately, especially with the cop killings of white cops killing unarmed black cops that brought this whole racism thing up again. There are even references to the president and Mrs. Obama and their experiences of racism, which I'll talk to you about a little bit later in the lecture. First of all, the word race is a competitive word, even if you think of it athletically. Sports. It suggests competition between people or athletes or runners or horses or vehicles or boats or whatever. It's a competitive term whether you're referring to ethnicities or whether you're referring to sports. Race brings up stuff. It's an ambitious term. It's a term of exertion. With regard to tonight's questions on ethnicity, the dictionary describes race as each of the major divisions, that word divisions, of humankind. Division, two visions or diverse visions or outlooks or perceptions. Those are little subtle hidden meanings behind words and the energies and vibrations and syncopations of these words and how they affect you chemically or how they affect you on a soul or cellular level. And this is a new kind of scientific way of looking at responses to life. But so the dictionary describes race as each of a major division of humankind having distinct physical characteristics. People of all races, colors, creeds, we hear that all the time, all races, colors, creeds or belief systems. Creeds means religions. Okay, a group of people sharing the same culture, considered a race, or the same history, or the same language, etc. It's an ethnic group. Ethnic comes from the Greek word for nation, ethnos. All nations are all ethnic groups or expressions. On the day of Pentecost, there were people from all ethnics, all ethnos in Greek, all nations in the city of Jerusalem. Pentecost is about speaking not gibberish, but speaking in languages that relate to other cultures. That where the thing that brought that I've brought up in classical Pentecostalism, and of course it has a certain stigma associated with it religiously. But after all these years, I see Pentecostalism as relating language-wise or communication-wise to somebody who you wouldn't understand or who wouldn't understand you. And you talk about the glory or the clarity of divinity, the glory of God, the clarity of divinity is the way I describe that. Okay, so we're talking about races and the diversities of the cultures. That doesn't mean it's competitive, but when you get comparative, which we tend to do by nature, we compare and we eventually or ultimately compete or subtly compete. When you compare, you compete even with colors that we wear in our own wardrobes and the way we look at members of our body. Our hands or our fingers or our ears or some parts of the body are more delicately handled. Usually that's more private is more covered with clothing or wardrobe. The hands, the face are the only part you see most, sometimes arms, and with women, legs, or with guys in the summertime, shorts, legs, and occasionally feet. But we are ashamed, less willing to expose certain parts of the body if that part seems unattractive or unappealing. We are prejudiced against our own selves, our own bodies. Our hair, we prejudge our hair or our nose or our lips. We're very critical of ourselves because we compare ourselves to other people, and then we compete subtly, subconsciously with those same people. You can do that in the home. Family members do it. As to where you're going to sit at the table, who's going to have the favorite piece of chicken or the largest piece of chicken or the thickest steak or the largest bowl of Cheerios or whatever. So in each case, the word race suggests, again, whether sports or ethnicity, competition. It expresses diversity. It expresses divisions. It expresses differences. Not necessarily separations, just separateness. Separateness is forming or viewed as a unit apart from or by itself. It's not necessarily separated, but it's individualized or uniquely separated or separate from. Separation is the division of something into constituent or distinct elements. So separateness and separation are not identical. They're similar, but they're not identical. So we have to be separate and yet not separated. We can be unique and special ethnically. As long as there's race, there's going to be elements of racism. As long as there's going to be diversity, there's going to be elements of division. Now, that's not a negative term, and it's not a negative reality. It's okay to be separate, but being separated tends to be contentious and Protestant or Protestant, and it causes sometimes resistance or resentment when there's this when you're being sequestered from somebody else or something else in a very conspicuous and deliberate way, because usually things that you want to be separated from, not just separate from, but separated from, are things that are offensive to you, or frightening to you, or intimidating to you, or distasteful, unattractive, distasteful. You don't like it or them. And that's hurtful to people because everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to be accepted and confirmed and affirmed, regardless of the ethnicity or the gender or the sexuality or the sensuality, what things you feel and sense and like. People who like Hispanic food, Mexican food, are going to go to Mexican restaurants more often. And you don't have to be Mexican to prefer Mexican food. You don't have to be Chinese to prefer Chinese food. You don't have to be black or African to like soul food or ethnic foods. So both racism, and this is an important comment I'm going to make right now. I don't want to sound offensive, but I think it's an important observation, because I not only look at things as they are, or I don't judge a person by what they do, but by what they were thinking maybe 10 minutes before they did it. I look at it's called etymology. I study the essence and the meaning and the origin of words. I don't look at a situation just as it is. I am always trying to get, quote unquote, to the bottom of the situation. Why did that occur? Or why do things occur as they are? I like psychology. I like the logic of thought, because thoughts are powerful and creative and inventive. And what are you thinking that causes you to respond? What is a group of people or an institution or a particular political party or religion or denomination or a certain sorority or fraternity or group or some club or clique or clan? What makes people do what they do, especially if it's harmful or hurtful or hateful? And also, if it's good and benevolent and charitable and philanthropic, what's behind that? We all have our guesstimations and estimations and general perceptions of what make people do good things or bad things, or what we consider bad things, or threatening things. Sometimes it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just you're threatened by it or intimidated by it or you don't feel comfortable about it. So both racism and classism, in my opinion, at least find their recent or modern roots in the basic tenets of Christianity's idea of separation. Come ye out from among them. That's actually a Jewish reference of the Old Testament. And be ye separate. That's a powerful statement that we as quote-unquote holiness people, Pentecostal, Protestant, fundamentalist Christians, come ye out from among the sinners or the unbelievers and be ye separate. Touch not the unclean thing. Most of us misinterpret the meaning of that. That's really not a reference to sin, and I'm not going to get into all that tonight, but those are reference to things that are outside the parameters of a particular belief system when it comes to customs or traditions or dogmas or doctrines or morals. Morals and customs are the same thing. Both racism and classism find their recent or modern roots and their ancient roots, but they're at least the last 2,000 years, in the basic tenets of the Christians, of Christianity's idea of a chosen people. That finds its roots in the Hebrew concept of being God's, the Jews being God's chosen people, which is to infer that other people groups are not chosen or are viewed or valued differently or even less than Jews and or Christians. We've prided ourselves for years. I did too in 1 Peter 2:9. This is the NIV. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special people, or the King James says, a peculiar people, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness or obscurity into his marvelous light or enlightenment. Even New Thought, expanded consciousness people, one of which I am, can sometimes have this little condescending, elitist attitude that we are the enlightened ones and everybody else in fundamentalism and Christianity and any other religion are in darkness or obscurity, or they're behind, or they're out of step, or they're out of touch, or they're in tradition, they're antiquated in their thinking. We all have these judgments. So the New Thought people, I've embraced this whole New Thought concept, and they have embraced me, but there's a little prejudice there. We're just by nature prejudicial. We prejudge things based on labels and titles and visuals, what it looks like. We have these symbols or situations that we have prejudged, or we've had an experience in a pre-notion or presupposed notion about something or someone. We're battling this all the time. When I say battling, we're navigating and negotiating our way through all these presupposed notions. Every day you have to clear your mind. When you see white people, what do you think if you're not white or Anglo? Do you have an immediate judgment that they don't like you, or that they're afraid of you, or that they think they're better than you, or that they hate you because you're not who they are? Vice versa, or by the same token, if you are Anglo, European American, or white, and you see an ethnic person, do you presume they are sinister, or predatory, or angry enough to hurt you, or hit you, or even hate you? If you see an ethnic American or a Hispanic American speaking with an accent of any accent, whether that's Asian or Hispanic or Middle Eastern, do you immediately assume that they are an undocumented or a illegal alien? Those terms are out there. I don't even use that term anymore. I use the term undocumented alien or an undocumented citizen. They don't have all the documents that give them citizen rights to full citizenry in America. And that's a long, drawn-out process. They may have been working on it for years, but they don't have it. They still have a green card. They can work. They even pay taxes. They live. They produce. They're part of the economy, part of the community. But they are not legal American citizens because the process is so detailed and paperwork and red tape and all that kind of stuff. It's easy to judge them as evil or sinister or against us. You can live near neighbors for years who are not documented citizens and not know that and assume they're okay until you find out. Then you prejudge them. Or you can be living next to a couple of ladies that have been living together for 30 years. You didn't know they were gay. And then later you learned, or a couple of men living together, or a family. And you just didn't think about it. And one day you found out they were actually same-gender loving people and were married. Then you come up with all of these judgments and prejudgments or prejudicial appraisals of them. And that's a form of profiling or racism or classism or clanism in one sense. That scripture I just quoted, we're holy, we're chosen. I felt like that for years. I was elitist and a little bit condescending on any other religion and really most other Christian denomination. If you weren't Pentecostal, classical Pentecostal, and didn't have the black touch to it, because we had a lot of non-black Pentecostals and we related to them differently than other fundamentalist Christians, but classical Pentecostals in comparison to neo-Pentecostals, the charismatics, who are, I'm a spiritual Baptist or a spiritual Methodist or a spiritual Catholic or a spiritual Episcopalian. You weren't classical Pentecostals, speaking in tongues with the dialect with which we classicals do. All kinds of prejudices, and here I am, 61 years old, and I'm observing them differently and purging myself of the poison aspect of prejudice. It's almost impossible to completely be without prejudice or to not prejudge. Even your wife and children or spouse and children or partner and children. Even the people you work with or work for or who work for you or whom you work for. Your neighbors who have not spoken to you and we've lived in the same neighborhood. We just moved into this neighborhood a couple of months ago back to Tulsa, and we have neighbors on either side who are quite friendly, and everybody nods, and we're not friends, but we're friendly. We don't hang out with each other yet. In fact, I haven't noticed that on the street. Some of these people have lived here for years, and they're cordial, and they're kind, and they're courteous, or they court one another, but not. They don't want to hang out. Okay, there are different denominations, different religious persuasions, different ethnicities, or different belief systems, different political parties. And sometimes they don't want to know all that because they don't want an argument, and they just are nice. It's a gated community, so there's a little bit of exclusion in that. And I've lived in gated communities for almost 40 years just because it's protective, and strangers don't just walk up to your door. Me being somewhat of a public figure on television in this city and nationwide for many years, I didn't want invasions, especially when I got married and had children. But even before that, I always lived in where people couldn't have direct access to me because there were so many intrusions and invasions. And I've lived in lovely places that were not gated communities, but the house was gated, just so somebody couldn't get directly to. So now, is that prejudice? Is that meanness? Is that elitism? Is that condescension? Some of it's protective, some of it's intimidation, some of it's a little self-consciousness. But a lot of it's just a precautionary measure because of who I am in this particular community. Now, Martin Luther King said in his famous I Have a Dream speech, this is a powerful quote, "We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force." Very powerful statement. The marvelous new militancy, and he's not talking about war, the marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community, he said back then, must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, and mean sisters, as evidenced by their presence here today, which is the Washington March, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with or tied to our destiny. It's not just tied up with, but he might have said it's tied to our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom, white people's freedom, is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. One of the most profound statements, and he made many, that he's ever made. Let me read it to you again. This is his comment. When it comes to racism and race issues, and there's been a lot of demonstration and marching of late here in this country, across the country. Some of it's emotional, some of it's unguided or misguided, some of it's very structured and very pointed and very targeted and aimed. Sometimes you wonder who's behind all of it because there's so many marches and they've all just kind of, is it social media? They just popped up. Who's the leader? This last one to Washington was, of course, Al Sharpton, whom I've known personally for many years and befriended and been on his radio program. He's preached for me and me for him. So We're from the same denominational background, but he's a lot more socially active. He's a social activist and a civil rights activist and human rights activist in ways that our particular denomination wasn't. But he grew up and moved away from just being into the denomination the way I was and expanded the reach of his influence. Jesse Jackson is a personal friend of mine, and he is from the Baptist tradition. His daughter, Santine, and I have been close since we lived in Tulsa. I've done her television program on the Word program. The last 4 years, I've gone on Christmas morning to Cook County Jail with Jesse Jackson. I've been to their home, and his wife, Jackie, and all the boys. I've just been friends with them, and I've studied Clay Evans, and Minister Farrakhan is a personal friend. I spent 3.5 hours in his home the first time I met him, talking about music and about Jesus and about religion. And he came the next morning to hear me speak at Christ Universal Temple there 5 years ago in Chicago. I have several Jewish rabbinical friends, rabbis in the local synagogues here who are my friends and with whom I've spoken. And in their synagogues, I've ministered, packed out houses and had fellowships. I've met with many Muslim imams and clerics or friends who are of the Islamic persuasion or Buddhist, Zen Buddhism, and various atheists and agnostics and intellectuals and less intellectuals and all. And I love all these conversations, and there I go into them, as many come into those meetings with me, with a little prejudice of some type. It's not poison. I do prejudge sometimes somebody before I've met them, presuming that they might have an attitude or presuming that they won't, and they do. You know, you never know. People are protective and precautious and a little bit intimidated or have a timidity about them by nature. It's human to be that way. But when it becomes poison and you get defensive and offensive or offended easily, then you put yourself in an awkward position and it's hard to get out of it. Let me read the comment again by Dr. King, Martin Luther King. We must not allow our creative protest, and everybody's always involved in some creative protest. Marriage couples are, teenagers and families, sibling rivalries. You protest on the job. You protest in your own particular church, community, club, clan, clique, whatever. There's always some protestations going on. You go to the service station, you may protest something. You go to the marketplace, you go to the mall, you protest about something or contest something. That's just human nature. He, of course, is referring to these large, public, massive protestations that he led and inspired in this country and that have been led and inspired subsequent to his assassination. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate, he says, into physical violence, because that happened a lot of times. You start protesting something, it's like a husband and wife arguing about something or a couple arguing about something. Protesting. It can degenerate into physical violence. All the stuff on television about our athletes, the athletes are not the only ones who abuse their spouses, but when it's a high testosterone and ego-driven profession, politics, entertainment, contact sports, the adrenaline, the ego, the testosterone, the energy is high, the chances for violence are high. Even police officers, there's been a lot of discussion about police officers using police brutality, especially ethnically, but not exclusively ethnically, but particularly ethnically. But police officers wear uniforms, they have badges, they've got guns, hats, shades, helmets, squad cars, motorcycles. They're tough. It's the masculine macho thing to be. You can hardly find a police officer or soldier without a pretty significant ego when you put on the uniform. Any uniform, especially a military uniform, makes a person kind of proud. You can be a little cocky. You know you look different. You know you look cool. You both inspire respect and in some ways fear, if not reverence. And so you tend to, even I can put on my collar and my clerical things or my vestments as a bishop. There's a certain austerity that goes along with it. You want to walk in the room, you got all that stuff on. People say hi, Father. If I travel with my collar, which I rarely do, but when I do and when I have done, people let me sit first or go in. They just defer. Now, today, you're talking about racial profiling, professional profiling. Sometimes if you see a priest or a preacher, you immediately judge him to be lazy or a conniver or abusive. Catholic priests are always under suspicion. Are they gay? Or are they, and if they are gay, are they child molesters or pedophiles? That's never been so randomly presumed or assumed as they are today because of all the disclosures about sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. It's not the proudest uniform to wear. Even police officers are professionally profiled anymore because you can subtly or slightly assume or presume that they might be in a certain circumstance using excessive force. They might be driven by their ego. They may have had an argument with their wife before they left home or spouse. They may be a closet alcoholic, or they may be a substance abuser because of the anxiety and the stress of their profession. Many police officers have unhappy marriages. They're tense or tenuous because the wife has to know, or the spouse, particularly the wife, every morning when he leaves, she doesn't know if he's going to come home or if he's going to come home whole. He may lose an arm or get shot or injured or could get involved. Now it's not a proud thing to put your police car, park it in your drive like people do. You know, even here in Oklahoma, you can find where police officers live. That makes you really a candidate for abuse, or somebody could slice the tires or spray paint your house. Now the police officer can't just drive around like the proud profession that respected and regarded as it once did. It's changed possibly forever in many people's thinking. That's professional profiling. Now should you assume that because you see a football player that he's, especially if he's African American, since the ones that have been in the news lately have been African American, is abusive to their spouse? We were shocked by, or girlfriend, we were shocked by these revelations about these athletes. They're already millionaires. They're muscular and strong and masculine, and that they would beat or hit or strike. Even the football player who was using a switch to correct his son. They were saying a tree branch when it first came out. Well, I knew it was a switch. I got spanked one or twice, not by my parents, but my Aunt Lala used to use a switch. A lot of people used switches or got beaten or whipped or spanked with switches. Usually belts, but sometimes telephone cords or iron cords. I had friends, you could see the whelps on their arms because if you hit with I never could get it in my mind how any parent could take an electric cord and strike their child because it's thin and tight and sharp and it cuts the skin. It's hard enough to get whipped with a belt. It's flat, tends to hit, and sometimes it leaves a scar, sometimes it doesn't. But usually a whelp, there's swellings, or a hand or a shoe or a paddle. They could legally do that in high school in the 60s. They called them swats. Girls rarely got them, but guys had to bend over like this, and the coach, usually the coach, or sometimes the principal, would swat, and that thing would burn your tail off. And I saw it happen. I didn't get it very often. I don't know, maybe once. I can't remember. But I tried it to see what it's like, and I slightly hit myself, and I thought, oh, my God, if they hit me really hard. And I saw they had paddles with little holes in them, and they would hit the... We used to laugh at the whiteboards when they would get hit because they'd have little red circles all over their butts, and we would laugh at them in junior high school and high. And they would laugh, afterward too. It was just kind of all in fun. Now that would be considered illegal in most places or abusive. But a lot of people got whippings or spankings or beatings in this American culture, regardless of the ethnicity or the race. When I was a kid, 60 years ago, it was common. South, North, more in the South, but everywhere. So the culture is changing so fast, and a lot of the prejudices, everybody has some basic prejudice. And mine was never poisoned. Like, for instance, coming up as an African-American, if I saw a boxing, I remember back they did have the boxing on television, if there was a black man, automatically, didn't have to know his name, his state, his city, his last name, his mama name, his religion. If he was black, I wanted him to win. It was an automatic. I wanted the black person to win over the non-black. if it was two white guys, I'd want the one in the black trunks to win. That was just, now there was no poison in that. It's just a prejudgment that I wanted if he was ethnic, I would prefer the ethnic to win over the non-ethnic person when I was coming up. That's kind of still there. Now it would be the same with an Oklahoman. I'm not a big athlete or a big sports person, but if Oklahoma is in sports competing against any state, I would want Oklahoma and or California to win. If it was Oklahoma against California, because I lived the first 18 years of my life, and I was born actually in California, I'd want California to win. I just think it's a cool state. But I've been here 43 years, almost 44, so, and then I lived 5 years in Chicago, so I think about Illinois. These are little prejudices that we have. My daughter goes to Jinx, and so I would want the Jinx school to win. I don't even know who they're playing. I don't care who they're playing. These are common prejudices or preferences that people have. I don't see any particular poison in that. So, but I acknowledge that it's there. My wife's from Louisiana, so I would have a little bit of a tenderness toward Louisiana because of her having been born there. I'm quick to say if somebody brings up, my wife's from New Orleans. She's not actually from New Orleans. That's where I met her. She's from Lake Charles, but I met her in New Orleans, and so I kind of say that. My kids now were born in Oklahoma, but so is my maternal grandmother. So and her family. So these are things I'm bringing out so you could be aware that we have these tendencies to prejudge based on preferences more than prejudices. It's not that I'm prejudging California or Massachusetts or North Dakota. I just prefer that they be an Oklahoman or a Californian or maybe now a Chicagoan or Illinoisan, a Louisianan. My mother's from Texas, maybe a Texan. That's just a slight but very common example of how we tend to or prefer somebody. Let me read the Dr. King statement again because it's very powerful. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Family, marital, parents and children, physical violence. Sometimes, when the children are coming up and you got to get a firm grip on the authority of the home, I remember when my kids I spanked them once or twice and they were little, but they knew I meant business. So the next time I said, boy, get away from the son. Hey, Julian, Madge, that's enough. I'd raise my voice. They know I'm serious. They respond to me differently than they do their mother. But that's not that I had to beat my kids all the time. Now, we responded to our dad. Dad would drop his voice. What your mama say? You hear your mama say? Your mama tell you to put that back. I'd be running to the house with an apple on it. Hey, boy, Carlton, your mama say you could have that? He didn't say, did I say? He'd always say, did your mama say you could have that? It's like, ask your mama. But he would lower the voice, speak a little bit more masculinity, and it would stun us. He usually only had to say it once because my dad meant it. He didn't whip us a lot, but when we got a whipping, we knew we were whipped. They were short and to the point. He didn't do a lot of arguing and fussing, and you never heard my daddy raising his voice a lot in our home. Mama would be, you could hear down the block. She didn't want to whip us. Daddy didn't either, but when we needed it, we got it. And so did the neighbors. You could hear people next door getting a whipping. Not wives. Sometimes you could, actually. In my neighborhood, we lived in the ghetto. We heard across the street. Sometimes police officers were there. Sometimes the police officer would have to come because a father had abusively whipped usually his son, occasionally the daughter. But getting whippings were common. Let me get back to the point. We must not allow our creative protest, that's a powerful statement, to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. He's talking about inner passion, spiritual transcendence. That's a very powerful statement. It's a spiritual statement. It's not just a play on words. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community, Dr. King said, must not lead us to a distrust of all white people, or I would say all other ethnicities. The marvelous new militancy, which is passion, which has engulfed the Negro community or the African American, or I could say Islamic or Jewish or Hispanic or Asian or Arabic or Anglo community, must not lead us to a distrust of all other non-ethnic people or people who are not of our ethnicities. For many of our non-blacks or our white brothers or whatever, non-American, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize, and this isn't just happening between blacks and whites, it's happening in America. They've come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, I like to say, or tied to our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom, and he was saying this at the Washington March, thousands of people were there, hundreds of thousands. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably, inseparably bound to our freedom as people of color, he was saying. We cannot walk alone. Very, very powerful, very admirable statement. I love it. I love him. And of course, most people do. Now, Albert Einstein said this: the one who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The one who walks alone is likely to find himself in places no one else has ever gone. Now, that's on a personal level. I want to make a comment about groupthink and how everybody goes with the flow or the flood, whatever it is, without investigating, without asking questions. You see a crowd assembling, you run toward it. Usually it's around a train wreck or some kind of violent occurrence or some kind of emergency, and the crowd rushes to see it or goes with the flow. It's okay, and I think it's irresponsible not to ask questions. Sometimes, and as any of you who know my story, many of you do, I sort of deviated from the crowd of my religious doctrinal background and running behind the traditional fundamentalist position, though I was an expert in that tradition and an exponent of it, and one of the leaders of the movement. I didn't know this statement then, but I was following it philosophically and in principle. The one who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. Sometimes when I run into people that I ran back with 10, 12 years ago, they're exactly where I left them. Haven't moved psychologically or spiritually or transcendently any farther. They're quoting the same scriptures, going through the same motions, and some of them are very happy there, but many aren't. They're just like clones and clowns, just going through the motions. It concerns me. Sometimes it alarms me that people can get locked into tradition and stay that long. The one who follows the crowd, you will usually go no further than the crowd. The one who walks alone is likely to find himself in places no one else has ever gone. In other words, just because everybody's prejudiced about something or towards something, that doesn't mean you have to have the same opinion. One of the things that I like about The View is, since Whoopi Goldberg has been on there, Whoopi, Anna and Rosie on the other end, they are very independent, and they are very, in my opinion, pretty solid, sound, grounded people. Their opinions, sometimes they are in conflict, but in general, they're very authentic. In fact, everybody on the View this time, I've never liked it when it first came out. It was just a bunch of women chattering, but I started watching it when Whoopi got on there, because Whoopi's always made a little more sense to me. And of course, she's a humorist and a comedian, and I like all that. But I listen. She's a thinker, and she's not this greatly formally educated person. She's very down to earth, very common, very relatable. And with her on one end and Rosie on the Rosie. What's her last name? On the other end, they bring great balance. I love them. There's two Rosies on there, and I like both of them. In fact, I like all of them, the View. But Whoopi brings a sort of sobriety to it. She's funny. She's rare. She's liable to cuss. She pretty much says what she thinks and what a lot of people are feeling, and I think that's why she's so attractive to so many people. Now let's talk about racial profiling, which is the use of race or ethnicity as grounds for suspecting someone of having committed an offense, or that they will commit an offense. Racial profiling. These days, as I said earlier, wearing a police uniform can be profession profiling. or being a priest or a preacher, especially a televangelist, can again be a profession profiling because we have seen all these warped and unsavory images of police officers or priests or preachers, whether that's preachers of LA, and I know some of them personally, that image, or some televangelist that's manipulating like a used car salesman, and even that statement is prejudicial. Since preaching inclusion and receiving rather profound and adamant rejection from fundamentalist Christians, these days I have to deliberately avoid looking for the closest exit if a Christian walks in the room that identifies him or herself as such. If they've got the fish or the cross, or they have a Bible, or they have this "honk if you love Jesus" sticker on their car, immediately I think, okay, I'm prejudging them. That they're all prejudicial, discriminatory, elitist, condescending, judgmental. They're not all that way. Some of the most decent people I know are fundamentalist Christians. Beautiful people. Oklahoma has some of the most decent human beings on the planet, but don't cross them. I mean, I have most of my relatives are Christians, fundamentalist Pentecostal Christians. They love me nonetheless. They don't have the quite same relationship, some of them, with me as they did back when I was Bishop Carlton Pearson, the celebrated pastor, preacher, television personality, and all that stuff. I miss all that, but not so much that I would go back to it and leave the freedom of my soul. Now, when I say freedom, I'm not talking about just going out doing anything on the planet that people do. I'm talking about an inward lucidity and fluidity of soul and self. My spirit is not tangled and tied and stressed over the things that I used to. And again, I'm not talking about quote-unquote sins. I'm just talking about being, loving, releasing, and I'm free not to judge the way I judged. I evaluate people and estimate people and esteem people that in my fundamentalist background I would not have been allowed to or expected to esteem. I have esteem for everybody. And so there are different levels of esteem, but I respect people for who they are and how they believe, and non-judgmentally, or less judgmentally, I should say. We're all somewhat racist or profilers or prejudgers or prejudicial innately. I've said that. That's an important point I want you to get in tonight's lecture. Now, in the movie Fast and Furious, I remember one of the actors saying that the difference between a cop and a criminal is one bad judgment. The difference between a cop and a criminal, one bad judgment. Cops are supposed to protect and serve. They're supposed to arrest offenders or criminals or find them or protect the public from illegalities. They're authorized to shoot and kill, to injure, to maim, to restrain. And so there's a cockiness that goes along with it, but there's a caustic threat, and they put their lives in jeopardy every day. I want to emphasize that we don't want to make police officers public enemy number one based on ethnicity or profession. Or I think 123 African Americans were killed by police officers last year. A little more than twice that many whites, but that would include Hispanics, I think, were killed by police officers. But how many more were protected? You can't judge the whole operation, the whole institution of law enforcement. One bad apple doesn't spoil the whole group. So we got to use wisdom and decency. And anyway, the Obamas made this comment. There's no the president said this, there's no black male my age, and he's in his 40s, who's a professional. I think he just turned 50. There are no blacks males my age who is a professional who hasn't come out of a restaurant and is waiting for their car and somebody didn't hand them their keys, said the president, adding that yes, it had happened to him. Well, there are millions of people his age who are black who've never had that experience and won't. But there are hundreds and thousands of situations where a black man standing there. I've done it myself as a black man. I have mistaken other ethnicities, including whites, for being an employee of a store or a place. Not that it was always menial labor, but I assumed somebody was a clerk in a store who wasn't. And they weren't always black or ethnic. Sometimes they were white, but they were wearing a color that looked like the uniforms that people were wearing. I've stood outside thousands of restaurants and had my car valeted, and nobody ever thought I was. But there have been times, once or twice, I can't remember specifically, when somebody thought I was a clerk in a store or a custodian or a janitor, or that I could help them with information. I don't consider that racism. And if it is, it isn't poisonous racism for somebody to think. Because remember, for hundreds of years in this country, blacks did all the menial labor. We were the custodians and the chauffeurs and the valets and the janitors and, all that kind of stuff. My dad, that's all he did. Not all he did, but for years he did some of that kind of. My grandfather, my uncles, they were garbage men, they were janitors, they were custodians. They were not educated. Some of them couldn't read. I had two pastors who cleaned banks. Their profession was janitorial, custodial work. And then they preached on Sundays. So we're just one generation from that. So it's still, I wouldn't freak out over that. I don't consider that racism. That is profiling slightly, ethnic profiling, not in the sense you're going to arrest them. You just demean them, or you think that they would be doing menial labor. Mrs. Obama recalled another incident. She says that the president was wearing a tuxedo at a black tie dinner, and somebody asked him to get coffee, assuming that he was a maitre d' or one of the waiters. Now, that didn't happen while he was president. I don't think that happened while he was senator. It happened while he was probably in politics or was teaching law school. That's kind of common if the servants are wearing tuxedos and some of the servants or waiters are black or Hispanic. It wouldn't be a big racist profiling or evil thing for somebody to assume you might be one of the servants there. So I wouldn't react to that, and I don't consider that violent, vicious, poisonous racism. It is identifying a race with a certain work ethic or a certain social strata. And I've had to apologize for mistaking. It's almost like mistaking a stout woman for being pregnant. I've done that far too many times in the ministry. It's always embarrassing. You assume a woman with a larger stomach or midriff that she's pregnant. And, when you have a congregation of a lot of younger women having babies and couples, you see pregnant women all the time, and you kind of get used to honoring them and asking what they know the baby is going to be, and boy or girl, and all that kind of stuff. So many times, it took me some years to get it right, to just know, if you're not sure, don't ask. But it's always embarrassing. But there's no poison in that. Though some of the ladies get really very, very offended that you're judging them for being pregnant or you judging them because they're overweight or what you would consider fat or something like that. It's almost unavoidable because fat people are fat people. Skinny people are skinny people. Black people or ethnic people are ethnic people. Rich people, if they appear that way, are rich. Some don't. How do you figure somebody with a bow tie and glasses is smart? Or that an Asian is better with math, or that an East Indian is better with computers. These are all prejudgments. Or quote-unquote poor white trash. Are poor white trash. You have these prejudgments about people based on what they drive, I've met millionaires who you would never sensually think they're that way. They just don't look it. Not their skin, their hair, their clothes. And then I've met very poor and uneducated people who look like millionaires or New York attorneys. That's just a term. Or cuss like a sailor, that kind of thing. Or Jew them down. That's a prejudicial statement. And there's a lot of ways that you can offend. You can, by saying to a gay person, hate the sin but love the sinner. Well, many gay people don't consider themselves their homosexuality or their sexuality sin any more than heterosexual people feel that their heterosexuality is sin. So I had to learn that because you would say, well, no, I hate the sin, but I love the sinner, brother. I love you, Mr. Gay Man. Well, that's offensive. Come here, my black brother. I love you just like you. I don't see your color. Well, what if you do see my color? Does that mean you're going to love me less? No, I'm colorblind. Well, I don't need you to be colorblind. I just need you to be prejudiced less. Don't prejudge me because you notice that I'm darker. I have a darker hue of skin. Sometimes darker complected people treat me with they prejudge me because I'm not dark enough, and white people prejudge me because I'm not light enough, or they prejudge me because I'm not dark enough. I mean, when I was traveling in South Africa, a white man had a private jet. I borrowed it to go to meet with the president of Zambia, and he let me borrow it. But he said, "You're not black. You're not black." My wife and I were there. She had her fine little hats on, had this princess dye look about her. 20 years she still does, but when she wore the hats and stuff, they immediately judged us as not African. And that offended me at first, or not black enough. And then, of course, people have judged me because of the way I talk, or the way I look, or the way I fix my hair. That's Jerry Kerr. I don't know what you call it, but there's a little curl on there. But I'm mixed ethnically, Native American, African American, Anglo American. My wife's French, Indian, and others. My mother's great grandfather was white. Her grandmother was raped repeatedly, and so her grandfather, Papa, came out half white. He was so white he could stop, so complected white, he could stop lynchings, and he did on his horse. His last name was Evans, like his father. No other siblings had that last name. They had other names, but his father claimed him. They were Irish people. Papa never lived with his father. He lived with the rest of the slaves, or the indentured servants. So I have a lot of racism and races in my background. My dad has a lot of Indian, Native American on his side. And we've gone through all the different changes, and they're interesting and beautiful. So things have gotten better in this country in a lot of ways, and we need to be aware of that. Racism, a young man on my Facebook, Andrew Burrow, his name, Andre Burrow, made this comment. Racism is more of an attitude that one has about themselves than about somebody else. That's an important statement. We tend to have attitudes about ourselves that can be racist. It can be condescending. It can be elitist. It can be prejudicial, prejudging. Even yourself. I walk in a room full of white people, I feel more conspicuous. I walk in a room full of black people, I feel conspicuous. If I walk into a room full of people I know, I don't feel so conspicuous. But if I walk into any room, any place, regardless of the ethnicity, now I will feel less conspicuous in a predominantly black crowd. But if I don't know them and they don't know me, or if they know me and I don't know them, there's a certain, awkwardness because they're judging me. But then I'm judging them just not with as much specificity because I don't know that much about them. They may know more about me, have opinions of me because they've seen me on television or read one of my books or heard about me on something, television, whatever. So there's always these sensitivities. I'm just saying take a sober view. Remember, don't project on others, as we have a tendency to, what we feel about ourselves if it's negative. Okay, if you have low self-image or issues with self-worth, you're going to project that on others. If you prejudge yourself, you're going to presume others to do the same. And we bring this stuff on ourselves habitually. We shouldn't, but we tend to do it. It's just the way it's going to be. We will end up forcing our feelings or our fears on people without, and I think unfairly we'll do it. And we need to get past that. We have to get past that. And we're learning how to. Well, this is a little rambling for some of you, but I just wanted to bring these thoughts out tonight and make you think about what you think about and why you think that. And let's tone the rhetoric down and not be so reactionary about anything. And don't always go with the big crowds because you're not sure what's behind that. And make your own individual judgments and grow from them and flow and expand and try to be less tense and less angry and work through it and navigate and manage your anger and your fears to where they're gone. I do it every day. It's not really a destination. It's a journey. I keep tapping and stretching and expanding and questioning and querying, and I'm learning a lot. I want you to learn too. I hope you've listened carefully and with interest, and I hope that something that I said tonight or whenever you heard this will be helpful to you. That's our objective here. I'm Carlton Pearson. You've been listening to Streaming Consciousness, and if you like what you hear and you want to be supportive of it, please donate something toward what we do. Somebody asked me tonight, is this live and interactive? It's live but not interactive because we don't have all the equipment for that yet, but I'm working toward it and on it. I've been saying that for over a year. We don't get large responses financially. We don't sell this stuff. We just put it out there. And people seem to respond more when they pay for something. But I'm working through that. I don't like to sell it, but sometimes I have to offer it as a donation, for a donation, and I don't mind doing that. Or at least I'm getting over my fear of doing that. But would you do something tonight? I'm a peacemaker, a peace agent. I consider myself a sacred humanist. I love humanity, the elegance and eloquence of human beings being human. I don't think that's a sin. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's something we're developing and making elegant. I love you. Thanks for your time. Thank you for attention. Thank you for your consciousness. God bless you, and God be you.